Good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. I certainly had a good lunch. I'm Jiri Huang, the moderator for session 15, titled Domestic and Overseas Listing Strategy of the BIOPLUS-INTERPHEX Korea 2022 conference. This is the very last day, and I'm really glad to meet all the audience taking your precious time to this event, despite your busy schedules, especially in a summer vacation season. In this session, we will be introduced to the listing guidelines from the world's top exchanges, the Hong Kong Exchange, NASDAQ, and, of course, the KOSDAQ. Bio startups in Korea, as you may are all aware of, recently are facing difficulties getting listed in Korea. And some are now seeking ways to go public outside of Korea, because as we all know, initial public offering is one of the key strategies for Korean buyer startups and other startups and investors as an exit route. Although there won't be a panel discussion, I'll try to grab the chance to ask a couple of questions after each speaker speaks. Today, we will take home the listing know-hows from the three major exchanges. I think next we have Mr. Robert McCooey from NASDAQ. Mr. McCooey is the current vice chairman and global head of capital markets at NASDAQ Listing Services. He leads the business development for the new listings in Latin America and Asia Pacific, and relationship management with companies throughout their corporate life cycle. Today, he will discuss the important role of NASDAQ in the funding of the companies in the biotech sector, as well as the current state of the market and outlook in a broader sense. Bob, thank you for joining us live. The mic is yours now.
Thank you. Nice to be with you. Let me pull up this presentation. I hope you can all see that now. I thought it would be valuable for all of us as our discussion in the time that we have together to talk about the current state of the market, and we'll talk a little bit about NASDAQ as the home for biotech listings. We have been listing biotech since our earliest days. No need to change our rules in our market since we have incubated and been the home for fundraising for biotechs for our 51 years and are the leader in terms of number of companies in the sector globally. In biotech and biopharma, we have almost 1,200 companies listed with NASDAQ in all different shapes and sizes, and the combined market capitalization of those companies is just slightly below $1 trillion in terms of capitalization. But let's talk a little bit about where we are as a market for biotech today. In NASDAQ, we fundamentally believe that it's really important for us not just to be the trading platform for companies, but to support them throughout their entire life cycle. And so we, starting in 2005, built out a suite of services to help companies as they transition from private to public, and then supporting them every day as public companies. It's hard to be a public company. It's not easy whether you are listing on your local exchange, whether you choose to list on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, or you come to literally the other side of the world and list on NASDAQ. We fundamentally believe that it is our important role to help companies not only make that transition, but then help them to identify shareholders, understand markets, and work with them. And one of the areas that we have at NASDAQ is an advisory business that helps companies to target the right investors, understand their shareholder base, and overall just get a better sense of what's happening in certain verticals. And as I just mentioned, healthcare is NASDAQ's largest vertical in terms of number of listed companies. And so our team has put together this short commentary on where we are. As you can see, the performance of healthcare has been very strong, was very strong last year, and has held up well as the market has sold off over the first half of 2022. clearly some of the major themes that have happened are the increase in interest rates and the US Fed, which is driving a lot of the underperformance of the market so far this year. Record inflation, driven by global supply chain issues, the war in Europe, continued geopolitical risk. Nowhere is that more evident than what is happening in Asia today. As I mentioned, supply chain constraints, as well as clearly with the market acting as well as it has over the past couple of years, outflows from equities. The most important and most widely followed index of biotech globally is the NASDAQ Biotech Index. And here is where not only NASDAQ has shown its leadership by creating this index, but also to be able to show all of you that in a time of very turbulent markets, this has been the safe haven. So even though the markets on the S&P 500 are down over 20% through the first half of the year, the NASDAQ Biotech Index was off only 16%. And I want to highlight the fact that it's really driven a lot by some of the large cap companies, those between 5 and 10 billion, which actually significantly overperformed, being up on the first half of the year, and those in the mega cap realm, which was only down 7%. So what are the themes behind this? Well, you certainly see a risk-off trade after 19 months of markets that went up literally every single day. Generalist interest in the biotech sector had declined, and then as the markets continued to sell off, it somewhat disappeared. Lack of consistent market-moving events. There had been a significant amount of M&A activity over the past couple of years, and that had dried up beginning earlier this year. The FDA under the new administration had become a little less accommodating to some of the trials and movement within the US government. Clearly, we've talked about the interest rate uptick that we've seen in the US and then around the globe. But we also have seen a lot of IPOs in the US market. And we'll talk about that in a second. So what have been the trends in terms of financing? As you can see, talking about the record number of deals in 20 and 21, 100 IPOs or thereabouts in each of those years. And when you look at, for example, 2020 in terms of the IPOs, the follow-on activity, it was a record amount of number of deals, and between 2019, 20, and 21, you see the amount of proceeds that were raised were significant and dwarf any other market globally in terms of the amount of capital raised. So for investors and what you all might be wanting to think about in terms of current state of the market, right now, the market is working for defensive large cap companies. That is where investors have been putting their dollars, as we saw from the earlier slide. It is the place that has overperformed in the market over the first half of the year, and that is currently the state that investors are looking at. Straightforward, easily to digest clinical stories. So ones that are not complicated, ones that are very easy for an investor to understand, especially if it's in a new sector, a new therapy. They want to make sure that they can clearly understand, or you can clearly articulate the story to them to help them to understand it and why they should be investing in your company. We've moved from growth at all cost to revenue generating companies. So those that either are revenue generating or have a clear path to profitability, clear path to revenue generation, clear path to the finish line of their clinical trials are the ones that investors are most focused on today. And I think that many companies are certainly putting their IPO, putting their ideas of doing an IPO, their aspirations aside until the overall macro story changes. We've seen good momentum in the US markets over the past month, but 1 month isn't going to make a market. So we've got to have the entire situation change in the US and then the global markets in order for the IPO market to come back to life, which is an important one for raising money for biotech. To highlight that further, give you a little sense of what investors have done over the first half of the year. There have been significant inflows, as you can see, as the second leading index inflow for healthcare into equities. But for most of the other sectors, healthcare has been someplace where dollars have been pulled out of. In fact, if you look at where the hedge funds have pulled out, what vertical, healthcare is the #1 vertical in terms of where they have been placing dollars in, and value investors have been pulling dollars out. So those that have been much more aggressive have continued to be aggressive in terms of the healthcare area, but those that are looking at value are being much more defensive currently in terms of biotech. As I mentioned, one of the areas that NASDAQ shines is the fact that we have an advisory team, and these are the type of reports that they're able to deliver to our clients as to what's happening in the market, especially the trends. When you work with almost 1,200 biotech and biopharma companies, you get the best data on exactly who's buying, who's selling, the flows in and out of biotech stocks. And that's the way that we're able to truly assist companies as they are focused on who they should be spending their time with in order to tell their story, and who they should be, shying away from, who may not be exactly, receptive to the biotech story at a particular moment in time. And so this gives you a sense of the type of buyers and sellers within different large cap and hedge fund verticals that were involved in the market over the first quarter of 2022. Finally, I want to just give you a sense of where the trends are, and we're hoping that what we're seeing here on the, as you see to the right there, the NASDAQ Biotech Index, along with institutional and index dollars being pulled out of biotech in the middle of June, and then moving up aggressively. And this chart does continue to move up in terms of the biotech investor trends over the past month. And so we're hoping that we may have seen the lows back in June, but certainly we need a little more data and a little more time in order to confirm that that's exactly the case. So what will turn the sector around? Well, we have global macro overhangs, and they certainly need to dissipate. Just because 1 month of good performance is not going to bring everyone back into the market. We need clarity, especially in the US, on the interest rate environment. Biotech needs positive data and regulatory developments. We need M&A to come back, and the valuation gap between public and private markets to tighten. The generalist investors must come back into the market. There is certainly a large swath, and we have the largest group of biotech investors in the world in the US. That's why companies from around the globe are attracted to be listed in the US markets, but we also need those generalist investors to come back in and recognize the value of companies in biotech. And then currently, certainly the new FDA leadership, a positive financing environment, and some clarity around drug pricing, since there is a lot of what we would call noise out of Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Federal government. And finally, where will investors be focusing? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's about revenue growth and a clear line of sight to that growth. Strong balance sheets with cash on hand. I won't go into some of the companies that are trading actually below cash versus those that are significantly cash strapped, which goes to liquidity. And then finally, the near-term catalysts and the late-stage candidates for coming to market. Where are the companies within those that are looking for the markets? Well, this gives you a sense of those that have come to market over late last year and earlier this year in preclinical and the different phases of their trials in the U.S. markets. And finally, across the almost 1,200 companies, where are the most popular groups? And so, as you can see, oncology just dwarfs the rest of the market currently, followed by neurology and infectious disease. We see infectious disease currently obviously growing with not only COVID-19, but now with monkeypox, and we would expect that there will be more companies that are focused on there. But there is once you get beyond oncology, you see the distribution is somewhat similar across both the percentage of disease group and the percentage of ownership across all of these sectors. And then what is it in terms of therapeutics? As you can see here, very focused on not only small molecule but gene therapy, cell therapy, and monoclonal antibodies. All are a focus of investors in the U.S. Now, my friend Mr. Chen has talked a lot about our friends at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Just want to give you a little quick sense of where we are at NASDAQ and our leadership over the past 51 years in this area. We have the seven largest companies in the U.S. capital markets. As you can gather, we have all of the largest companies in terms of biotech, but among our 5,000 companies, we do have an amazing group of biotech who are listed on our market, not just from the US, but companies like Beijing, Lian Bio, Zai Labs, a growing group of companies from China and across Asia who are listed with us. We are currently targeting or talking to over 8,500 private biotech companies. We're engaged in deep conversations with over 265 of them. As you can see, in the US, we listed 99% of the biopharma companies between ourselves and New York Stock Exchange. We won almost every company, and as we've talked about already, the amount of companies listed with us. We also did raise $77 billion in healthcare over the past 7 years, since 2015. In our advisory service, we have 45 dedicated specialists to help those companies to navigate the U.S. public markets and work with, as I mentioned, over 1,200 healthcare corporate clients, mostly biotech companies. Being part of NASDAQ as a biotech company puts you as a part of the NASDAQ Biotech Index. As we all know, index investing is becoming more and more important these days. And as a biotech company, you automatically become part of the NASDAQ Biotech Index, and you see the great success and the overperformance of the NASDAQ Biotech Index as we talked about, versus the overall market thus far this year. We have done exceedingly well in general in terms of IPOs, with a strong win rate on NASDAQ of companies coming to market, and we expect that to continue. Companies like to be around and associated with their peers, and the great family of companies that we have created. Those that we truly say are changing the world here each and every day. Just to give you a sense, we ring the opening and closing bell every day on NASDAQ. We welcome companies to come in and physically do that. We also are able to do it virtually. We start with a wonderful VIP breakfast, as you see down in the lower left-hand side. We have a fantastic opportunity for companies to come on the top of our iconic NASDAQ tower in the middle of Times Square and take a picture of the entire group there, as well as to help companies and their employees and investors understand the process of opening a stock, how they've gotten to that moment, but most importantly, what it means to be public and how trading takes place in the U.S. capital markets each and every day. And finally, I know I've talked about this a couple times, and just to tie a bow around it, NASDAQ does have an amazing group within NASDAQ to help our companies. And this just gives you some statistics on what we do, how many companies we work with, not just those that are listed on NASDAQ, but those that are listed in the U.S. capital markets in terms of delivering value through our advisory services each and every day to them. Ms. Wong, thank you very much. On behalf of NASDAQ, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our market and to give the group a sense of what's happening within the global biotech market today.
Thank you, Bob. I guess it's a global trend to stay conservative, not just NASDAQ. With the 16% market decline, and especially because journalist interest decline then disappeared, just out of curiosity, how welcoming, is Bob still here on live? I can't see his face right now.
I'm here.
Okay. Just out of my curiosity, how welcoming do you think NASDAQ is to Korean biotechs recently? And in what value do you see the Korean biotech's value in general these days? To be precise, does NASDAQ believe the number of licensing out deals and phase stage of clinical trials as each pipeline specifically as a significant factor or criteria to whether biotech companies can be listed on NASDAQ? Is that a criteria? Is that important for you?
It's not important for us. It may be important depending upon the company to the U.S. investors. And I would encourage any of the companies who have questions or concerns about that to talk to their advisors, especially their bankers, about positioning in the market, about time and receptivity among investors. But we at NASDAQ create a platform for companies to raise money. We've been doing it for 50 years. We are the largest, we're the most efficient in the market. We are welcoming of companies from around the globe. So we don't choose the winners and the losers. The markets choose the winners and the losers each and every day. What we do is to provide opportunity. We provide opportunity for domestic companies. We provide opportunities for companies, as I said, from around the world to raise money and to do, in the words of our former CEO, to do God's work on earth. And so we really think that providing companies the chance to not only to raise the capital that they need, but to raise their visibility and then support them as public companies is our sacred charge, is an important role that we play each and every day. And markets go in cycles. And we have gone through a tough cycle through the first half of the year. The market basically went up for a little over 10 years every day. And so I think we need to sometimes step back, understand that, I know that sometimes it will be frustrating for some of the participants here that they can't go public right away, but there are opportunities for them to continue to raise money through private markets, and then hopefully, one day become a NASDAQ listed company.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob, for your precious time shared with us. I know that it's 2 or 3 in the morning where you are across the world. So by now, I'll let you go.
Delighted to be with you, and congratulations on such a successful forum you're having with everyone there.
All righty. Thank you. Everyone, please give a round of applause to Bob McCooey. And looks like now we will bring Ms. Claire Seung-won Jung to deliver us the practical guidelines to U.S. stock market. Ms. Seung-won Jung is a partner at Global Department of Simon PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Team. She's been with the PwC for 19 years and specializes in cross-border IPOs and provides IPO audit and IPO advisory services for various companies. Please welcome her with a round of applause to the stage to present Roadmap for a Successful U.S. IPO.
네, 안녕하십니까. 방금 소개받은
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claire Chung, as was introduced before. So I'm sure that you must be pleased to hear something in Korean now for after a while. So I don't know if you just really like it or not. As it was introduced, I am with PwC. I am working on the IPO audit and IPO advisory services. I'd like to take this opportunity to give you the information about how you can be successful in the U.S. IPOs. I'd like to have a great session with you to confer what we have as an advice to you. When you think of IPO, there must be some requirements that you have to concur with. So raising money must be the first and foremost reason for you to decide upon this IPO in the U.S. You would like to have the fund raised here so that you can use it for other purposes that can have the synergy. So probably you can have some acquisition as your mind for another company that you can have synergy with. And also you can have some mechanism to give the incentives to the partners and the people you have worked with together. Also, you can have a lot of opportunities to have the exit strategy. So there can be many ways and multiple ways of using the funds made here. And with that expectation, you want to have an IPO and you are making the preparations to have the IPO. As known very well, Coupang was listed in the NYAX, and then 5 trillion won was the money raised at that time on the day of IPO. At that time, the market capitalization was like 60 trillion won at the moment of the IPO, and it reached to the peak of the 100 trillion won. But everyone knows that it has gone down very much nowadays. But after that, Huawei became another company on August 1st to have the IPO on the second time. If you might remember, it was doubled down as a company. So it was not the first time for a Korean company to have the IPO in the U.S. Actually, there were many in the 2003 and 4, and by the time 2006, we had the bubble.com of the IT companies. And then after that, the Korean companies were able to get the money needed only inside the Korean market afterwards. And also they learned that after IPO, it takes a lot of money for the management after the IPOs. IPO is not the end of the story, they say, because it's not a Korean market. So in the U.S. market, they have to have a lot of more spendings here. So after a while, after 6 to 7 years, now we're back on the boom of the IPO in the U.S. market. So if you want to do that, then you must be wondering what we really need to prepare for. So there can be requirements per sector in this IPO market. So if you have the booklets here, you can refer to it, and also you can find it on the websites as well. Most of the companies that are preparing for these IPO activities, especially when it comes to NASDAQ, you have to have some limit of the market capitalization. You have to go above that hurdle. And that in itself is not a big hurdle for that, because the hurdle is quite low for you to reach above. And then after that, right now, what you can do, can you be listed right now and then just overnight, or how much money you can raise? And also in this capital market, do you think that this market is really favorable to your business? And if so, how much? You have to think about all these things. And also after the IPO, how efficient and fast you can get the money from. So it's about the market size you have. That's about the slide on the right corner. And in the NYEX market, this is based on the first quarter of 2016. And if it is the 26 billion US dollars, it's like 33,000 trillion won in Korean. And also if you see this is the number of companies that you have on the left corner in the slide. And as London Stock Exchange must be interested to you. At the second time, Hong Kong is not an exception. KRX is also your home ground. So you have to be very interested in. So probably it's like 1/10 of the Nasdaq and NYSE. So I think the Korean market has grown up in size this much. I talked about the importance of sectors. So you have to know which sector is favorable to you in the market. And in the first quarter of 2022, we also had the breakdown of the industry sectors of the businesses, and you have the NYEX and also the Nasdaq. We have the businesses and the sectors here. We have bio and we have TMT. TMT is quite large as a company, but it can be compared to the Korean industry, which is quite lower than that. And also you say that the financial companies are quite big. And on the right side, this is the US IPO trend. So I don't have to elaborate on that because my previous speaker had talked about it in more detail. If it's about the biotech IPO, you can also think of some of the issues and key issues that you have to be aware of. So I've been interviewing many of the biotech companies, and some of the things came up during our interviews and discussions. Some of them thought that this could be very easy and they can just have the IPO at the time of the R&D. So by the time they were thinking of the R&D, by the time when the R&D is almost finished, they were thinking of the sales possibilities and the revenues they can generate, and they want to go for the US market, and they have some expectations where they can get the money from, which market could be their sources of the further revenues. So when they do the pre-IPO, they already experienced some increase of their market capitalization. That naturally leads to the liability to pay taxes, and that is a lingering factor for you to get so that's hesitant to get into the market right away. And also you have the pre-trials and also trial phases that you can think of. So you have to be concerned about where you are in terms of the clinical trials. And also in your documentation for the US IPO, the details are required and the level of depth is quite low. So you might be wondering if you really have to disclose all this information. That's the difference from the Korean market. So on the left side, you have the company names in here. They have been listed, and there are top 10 biotech companies in the US IPOs. And they have the $676 million as a proceeds of IPO. That takes about 30 to 50% of the market, and also mostly you have the 10 to 20% they are taken up for IPO from your market capitalization. So here in US IPO, you ought to take out more than what you have to take out in the Korean market, because you are required to have 30 to 50%. And also we have 10 to 7% in here. So this slide looks a little bit different from the previous one in the previous page. And that's because the companies that have maintained the status of IPO, they have the status. Probably they have gone through more phases in the clinical trials, so they are now in the phase 2 or 3 in this. So we can say that their progress has been made. But here we can see that there are companies in the preclinical stage as well, so it's quite encouraging for us to see that we can also have those companies included. Now that we have some preparations made after having the IPO filing, it will take 1 or 2 years to get ready for this. So the other things in the timeline will be explained further in other pages. Mostly, if you have had experiences of having your company listed in Korea, you you might be familiar with the timeline here. So we have the S1 here. So that's for the domestic filer's case to have the IPO, and that's the name of the document that they have to fill one. In Korea, the Korean companies have to use the form of F1, whereas S1 is for the American companies. So now we also have many other spec-related IPOs as well. So about 50% of the companies are going through the spec. The spec is, as you know, is quite efficient because the only thing you have to do is to have an merge and M&A within an existing listed companies so that you can be listed altogether. So you don't have to touch upon all the details in here. That can be a good thing for you only if you have a very good chemistry with the company as a partner. But I've seen many cases where the things went awry with those companies between the two, and the people in the other side of the fence are different from yours. Therefore, sometimes they just walk away from the agreement only after the IPO is finished. So if you have the 30 or 50% slushed out of the proceeds gathered only after the IPO. So the experiences have not so been good, so we are not recommending it to you anymore. I told you that you have to wait 1 or 2 years after filing. And what is important is what's coming afterwards. So when we have the company in preparation for IPO, we must have the IPO in mind. Only after the IPO, you have to have some backbone prepared. That in itself requires a lot of time. I was very brief in talking about finding and matching the companies. You have to find the right mix with you, and also you have to be able to manage the company with the capability of the company without it glitches after IPO. You also have to be audited by the U.S. authorities after the IPO. That's not something that frightens you. And also you have to be able to advertise your company, and you have to know of yourself, like KPIs and financial knowledge, the EBITDA, even if it's not detailed information about the accounting, you have to know some of your numbers that represent your companies. So, and also internal control is quite important. We have Korean SOX, SOX, and also the U.S. SOX is there, so this Sarbanes-Oxley law should be observed. So you have to think about all these as well. The next one is 2 pieces of the information and advice. The first one is that are you the foreign private issuer or not? If you are a foreign private issuer, not the domestic one, you will be appreciated by the stock market in that company. So you are given some kind of preference as a foreigner. Like for example, normally the 3 years should be given to you for the time within until the deadline of the filing, but you are given only 2 years. That's also a benefit to you, and also for the filing you have some kind of lowered criteria for that. And EGC stands for the Emerging Growth Company, and they have separate rule for EGC as well. So if you are in the EGC criteria, that's also a benefit for you. And also if it's IPO, if it is EGC companies mean that there are less than the 10 trillion won, and that is also which is like $1 billion US, which is a hurdle for you to have some more preferences. So if you are in the categories, you can use that direction as well. It's, to be in the EGC is a good thing. So I prepared this material for you and as in academic purposes, so I'm so just brief. But what I can tell you is that you have to be able to say that your documentation is good and your financial condition is good, and also that should be proved by your accountant as well, and it has the efficacy of 3 years only. So after 3 years you can have the statement publicly filed, so it can be an advantageous for you to have another round just after 3 years. And then also sometimes in Korea you don't have many experiences of having the control in the internal problems, then even if you have some problems, you are not subject to any punishment by law. But in the U.S., if you find some internal control matters after the IPO, you are in trouble because you're just breaching the law there. So you have to be ready for that in advance. And also we have so many other participants here. The key participants are like advisors, and also we have the other councils here. So in the Nasdaq and stock, as well as the NYSE, they have the participants here. We have the company personnel, we have underwriters council, and independent auditors as well. We have company councils. They are separate. Company councils and underwriter councils are different. So you have the F1 documentation to be filled. So I just prepared a summary of what you have to file in here. Still, it looks very complicated. So here, what you see on the left corner, the section is that we have the summary. After that, we have risk factors, and that's something you have to be careful about. And then use of proceeds, what you are going to use the money for. And then we'll also have the section for the capitalization, etc. After having the audit completed, now you are in the stage of IPO. Right before that, you must face the biggest hurdles, which is like the commitment of the SEC, so the FCC comments. You have prepared and filed in the documentation, and sometimes you get the questionnaires about you are wondering that if it is right or wrong. That will be given about 1 month. Within the 1 month, if you are not able to get the right status of the SEC comments, your thing will not be happening at all. So in the past, it was only 1 month, and it was publicly announced in the website. But nowadays, it's less severe nowadays, so it's getting better. Now the valuation is another issue that have to be very careful. In the pre-IPO, sometimes some investors must have bought your company just at a glance. So they're just looking at your company profile. They must have liked you when they purchased your stocks. However, they might have a second look and second guess about your company. So they had some idea about the valuation. Now that they have the second thought, probably they think that this valuation is not right. And also you have the weighted values, and the PWERM method is mostly opted. So you have to have a very frequent evaluation, at least quarterly. So on a quarterly basis, you are having evaluation. That's the normal practices, and you must be interested in the cost. This cost thing might not be so relevant to you at this moment of time, but the directly attributable offering costs have the legal fees and expenses as the most, and also mostly 5 to 7% is the practice. If it is at the 5 to 7 trillion won as like coupon, if it is 5 to 7%, it doesn't make sense. It's different. If it is not a big cap, not large cap, it's up to 7%. So the numbers I show you here is just on the average roughly. After the IPO, you also have the expenses that you incur. You have to be mindful of. I think I've covered most of it. That's me, and that's my Daniel Furtick is working with me mostly. In the U.S. IPO, the PwC in Korea cannot be alone in working all this together. We have to work very hard with our counterpart in the U.S. not to have any late supply. And I would like to have the contact from you so that we can have further discussions. Thank you very much.
질문 굉장히 많이 하고 싶지만 저한테 20초밖에
I want to have many questions, but I'm given only 20 minutes. Thank you very much for being academic, but I'm going to be teasy about this. I have a very general regular question. For the first time in Korea, Coupang was listed in Nasdaq for the first time as a Korean company. After 1 year from now on, do you think that there is a possibility for another Korean company to be listed in Nasdaq? To be frank, please. Yes, you are very tricky with that question. I want to know about that. And also, I prepared this presentation today wishing that there is another Korean company in the U.S. market. I am positive, however, because first of all, as you saw before, the sector should be favorable in that market. Half of the Nasdaq constituents are the biotech companies, so biotech is really a large portion of it. And you have to have a lot of documentations to be filled. And if you think that your company must not be familiar from the counterparts in the US, maybe you're wrong because there are so many similar companies in that regard. So it is very easy for you to just promote your company to other companies because they can understand you and once you have it. And also you have many other models to go after. Also, if I meet with many other biotech companies in the CEO level or the CX level, people have been studied in the US or have been lived in the US, and they have a lot of information about their US IPO experiences, and they have a lot of IR activities with the potential customers. So I don't think it will be difficult for you to go through all these things. And also, I talked about the preclinical stage and phase 1 stage companies that are also doing the IPO. So I see more of the companies that are doing that under that status, and it's very encouraging. I don't say that this is the absolute condition for now or absolute phenomena we see, but we are seeing some activities going on here. Once we have the consideration of the ecology, I believe that the future direction is to have more and more of the Korean companies to be in the IPO as biotech companies. Was a stupid question and a
Please give
very
Ms.
wise
Chung
answer.
a round
Thank
of
you.
applause for her presentation and a wonderful feedback. Thank you again. Finally, we have our last speaker from Korea Exchange, Mr. Im Jae-lee, will be on stage to give a presentation on the status of Kosdaq IPO and policy trends. Mr. Im Jae-lee is currently the senior manager at the Innovative Growth Support Team at the Korea Exchange. And since joining the Korea Exchange, he has worked on the disclosure, IPO, and accounting-related departments. In particular, he has performed reviewing the general companies and technology growth companies for 5 years. Now, please welcome Mr. Lee to the stage with a round of applause.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I am from Korea Exchange, Kosdaq Division. My name is Lee Im Jae. So, as introduced, I have been engaged in the listing review for tech companies and general companies. And from this year, I got a new role of providing consultings for our clients. So if you have any questions while preparing for the listing, then please do not hesitate to contact me. This is the content of my presentations. I'll first talk about the IPO status in Kosdaq today and also how we can strengthen the competitiveness of Kosdaq. Let's first take a look at the Kosdaq market. As of the June this year, actually last year, because of the COVID issue, we had some uncertainties, but the index was pretty good. The performance was very well. But then the interest rate hike, and because of the geopolitical risk involving the Ukraine war, the Kosdaq index declined significantly, down to 745.44 points. And also market cap has declined by 27% from 446 trillion won to 360 trillion won. And also the number of deals and the size of the deals have also declined. And here you can see the number of the IPO. So despite the bad external situation, IPO tends to be pretty strong. Now let's take a look at the Kosdaq IPO status. So as of year 2021, we have 115 listings, and except for SPAC, 91 companies are listed. And also when it comes to special listing for tech IPOs, we actually recorded the highest number last year with 31. And here you can see the number of filings. Again, last year, in year 2020, we achieved a record high in terms of the filings, and 2021 was nothing worse. And here you can see the special listing. And in the past, the special listing for tech IPOs, they were mainly utilized by bio companies. But then in 2021, non-bio companies have also utilized this system. So for example, like metaverse, AI, and big data. So we have about 22 non-bio firms applying for special listing for tech IPOs.
늘어난 것처럼 보이는 게 아니냐라고 말씀하실 수 있는데요. 지금 이 부분에서 기존의 저희 그러니까
And
전통적인 바이오는 신약 개발
traditional biopharmas, they focus on new drug development, and you can see that every year we have about 6 biopharma companies applying for Kosdaq listing. So what we see declining is the IVD sectors. I think it's because of the COVID diagnostics. But other than this sector, we don't really see changes in the biopharma sectors. And this is the IPO performance. So in year 2021, we raised 3.6 trillion won. In year 2022, with 44 companies, we raised 0.8 trillion won. And filings, in terms of number of filings, the performance is similar to the last year. And if you look at the special listing for tech IPO, we have about 18 last year, but this year 21, so slight increase. And as I said earlier, we have had the 44 companies newly listed. And also we still have the 30 more who are ready for listing after, and they already got the approval after the review.
최근에 이제 보시면 바이오 기업이
And you can see that the bio companies are now having difficulties for IPO because of the market fluctuations and uncertainties.
작년에 바이오 기업이
If you look at the last year's situation, we actually had 9 biopharmas going public.
5개고요.
But this year, until July, we had the 5 biopharma companies newly listed. And we have also 2 more candidates who finished the review process. In other words, this year we already have 7 biopharma companies newly listed. So I think that we can actually exceed the last year's record in a very easy way. But I think that the sentiment in the industry is a bit different because there are a lot of issues centering around the large cap companies, and they are highly covered by the press. So because of that, I think the sentiment itself is a bit negative. And let's take a look at Kosdaq policy. So in 2017, we came up with the new law to facilitate Kosdaq market. And in 2005, we adopted the special listing for tech IPO. And then we expanded that to
14년에는 전 업종으로 확대를 했고요.
17 new growth industries.
테슬라 모델
And then in year 2018, we had so-called Tesla model. And in year 2019, the special listing for tech IPOs have been expanded even to overseas players. So I think that this is just sort of the very exceptional system that the Kosdaq does have. Hong Kong Exchange does have a similar system, but unlike the Hong Kong Exchange system, we have the technology assessment, pre-assessment by experts.
작년에는 이제 업종별 상장 심사
And
도입을 해서 4차 산업 바이오 업종 특성에
also in year 2019, we applied the
소부장
listing review system by sectors, and in order to cultivate the material component equipment industries, we have adopted the listing eligibility review, and we actually streamlined this process in year 2019. And then in year 2020, we improved and revised the special listing for tech IPO.
거래소가 수용을 하고
And then in year 2021, again, we streamlined the review process for special listing for companies with excellent market cap.
IPO를 할 때 재무 요건을 중심으로 봤습니다.
Previously, during IPO, our focus was on financial performance or the past record. But nowadays, there have been some changes, and market cap has become the center of our attention. In other words, more and more, the future potential becomes increasingly important for IPO.
코스닥은 이제 경쟁력을 강화하기
And
위해서
in order to enhance our
세 가지
competitive edge, Kosdaq has come up with
시행하려고
three
하고 있습니다. 첫 번째는 글로벌
measures.
세그먼트입니다.
Number one is global segment, introducing global segment.
1,500개 이상의 기업이 있고
So as I said earlier, more than 1,500 companies are listed in Kosdaq.
기업들이 많.
And we have a lot of companies with great potentials, and the spectrum or the profiles of companies are just too diverse.
저희가 그러면 코스닥 대표
And therefore, with a single system, we cannot cover all of them. So, in order to pursue qualitative growth,
추진하고 있고요.
our plan is to introduce global segment.
코스닥 글로벌 세그먼트를
So we would like to establish a global segment where the key large players of the Kosdaq can all be included.
코스닥 정체성에 부합하는 기업들 중에서
So among the companies
지배구조 등이 우량한 기업
that meet the philosophy of the Kosdaq,
내외가 될 거라고 생각을 합니다.
we will select 70 to 80 key players, and they will be included separately in global segment.
편입 요건은
And here you can see some requirements for that inclusion. So number one is the market assessment or market cap, and also financial performance and the corporate governance requirements. When all these three requirements are met, then the company can be included in the global segment,
기존에 있던 상장
and the review process will
심사를 진행할 예정입니다.
take place at the point of listing for newly listed firms, and for existing companies, these review investigation will be carried out once a year.
그러면 이제
And it will be a voluntary system, so it's based on company submission and application.
글로벌 세그먼트에 들어가면
So number one and number two players in terms of market cap, once they are included in the global segment, they will not be removed. However, those who are in the so-called borderline, they can be included in the global segment, but then next year they will be removed. So with this fluctuation, it's very difficult to manage the global segment. And therefore, we have the new inclusion criteria, but if it's 100%, then for the maintenance, they only need to meet 70% of the requirements.
그리고 이제
This is to reduce uncertainty or the fluctuation.
때 이제 70% 정도를 적용할 거고요. 관리 종목이나 상장 폐지 사유가 발생했을 때는
And if there are any incidents that happen
그럼 이런 기업들에게는
that
어떤 혜택을 줄 수 있을지 고민하다가
meet the termination requirements, then their listing will be cancelled
이제 코스닥
immediately.
150하고 차별화돼서 우량 지표로 개발할 거고요.
And
이
also,
지표의 편입이
we are going to
되면은
develop the segment index. And once you are included in this segment index, I'm sure that you will be able to raise a lot of funds from the market.
일반 기업 같은 경우에 시가총액과 재무실적 요건을 보지만 바이오 같은 경우에는
And when it comes to bio industry,
R&D 요건을 봅니다.
the companies may have difficulty in fulfilling the financial requirements, so we look at R&D performance as well, and also the new drug development and clinical trial performance.
로도 충족된 걸로
So only with these performances, we assume that they actually meet the market cap requirements.
충족했을
And in
때
terms of the governance structure, again, we also look at their governances in accordance with the KCGS.
현재 이 부분에서는 준비가 막바지고요. 올 10월쯤 이 제도를 시행.
So this global segment is now under preparation, and it's going to be implemented around October this year. Next is about the standardization of the technology review system. So usually companies, they receive the technology review 3 years after the listing. But if you follow the track of the special listing for a tech IPO, then you have to receive the technology assessment prior to IPO. And I understand that there are a lot of concerns regarding that.
세 가지 이유 때문에 제도를 개선하는 건데요.
So that's why we decided to improve this system. And there are three purposes. Number one is to improve reliability of technology assessment, because we have 24 evaluators or reviewers, and there are some gaps among these 24 reviewers which could compromise the reliability of the assessments. And therefore, we try to standardize the evaluation model and come up with the clear guidelines so that we can reduce the gap among these 24 reviewers.
그래서
And also the special listing, it was originally designed for biopharma companies, and we only had a single criteria system. But when in a situation when we have a lot of non-bio startups applying for a special listing, we actually have to develop the right review system for them as well. And also the applications for technology assessment is increasing. And after the technology assessment, you have to apply for the preliminary review. And only when you get the good results from the preliminary review, you will be able to receive investment. So I think that the company have set up the timelines to follow this track. However, if there are bottlenecks in the technology assessment, then this could affect the rest of the schedules for companies. And therefore, we would like to make this technology assessment faster. And we want to streamline the process. So because of these three reasons, we would like to standardize the technology assessment system. So first of all, items of assessment and the index will be standardized. As for the special listing for tech IPO, the technology review is done by external parties. So depending on their judgment and independence, well, in order to improve the autonomy and independence, we applied only a very loose criteria, and because of that, there were some wide gaps among different reviewers. So this time, we developed the quantitative assessment items. And we also set up some essential items, which are mandatory, and then optional items as well. And by sectors, we also develop assessment index, or assessment criteria. And also as for the interpretation of the assessment results, we would like to provide some guidelines. And in order to reduce the gap among the different reviewers, we would like to have some guideline, and also we would like to improve the assessment process because the reviewers do have some difficulties and we want to resolve them. In August this year, we believe that we'll be able to establish the assessment model, and once it is available, then we would like to conduct the pilot test with the different assessment assessors, and once that project is complete, then late this year or early next year, we'll be able to apply this new system. Next is about the establishing the letters for growth or engine for growth. So, in fact, it takes pretty long time to go public. And so companies cannot prepare for these lengthy processes single-handedly. We still have limited number of IPOs and market liquidity is still limited. So in order to address these issues, we have come up with some measures. So in order to expand new listings, we would like to reduce the burdens that should be borne by companies. And also we improve some regulations as well. And we also want to provide various consulting services for companies to increase the win rate. So we have three kinds of consulting services. So number one is the internal accounting control and the disclosure system, as well as the supporting system for transfer listing and connects education. So this will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the precise introduction to the current IPO policy trends of COSDAC. 이임재 차장님, 한국거래소는 지금 기술 특례 상장
So the Korea exchange, because of the special listing for tech IPO, it is touted to be a very innovative exchange in the world. And also you also have a special listing for growth potential company, and this is something that the biotech companies can follow. Do you think is it really possible? And also Mr. Jung Sung, who talked about the US IPO, he said that the spec is not that trendy, But COSDAQ, you actually try to establish some measures to facilitate the spec-oriented IPO. So what's your view on that? As for the special listing for companies with growth potential, so if it is recommended by IB, then the two assessors will assess the company and they have to get, for the general special listing for tech IPO, you have to get assessment, 2 rounds of assessment. But if you follow this route, then you don't have to get assessment. But the problem is that you have to prove and show your growth potential. So if you can prove your growth potential, then you can follow this track. However, when it comes to biopharma companies, you cannot really achieve a rapid growth in the short period of time. It takes time. You have to conduct clinical trials. And also, in order to have some commercialization, you have to address all the regulatory hurdles with the MFDS. So it takes time. It's pretty time intensive. So if you can prove your growth potential, then yes, this track could be very fast and you can follow that. But if you cannot, then you have to rely on other options. So in that sense, as for the Connex company, single A, triple A rating, between the two, you only have to get single A rating. And you have to get the assessments by 2 assessors. And if you receive 1 single A rating from either one of the 2 companies, then you are okay. So it's a bit loose. It's not that strict. And also as for SPAC, bio firms and non-bio firms, somehow I think the public fund tend to be concentrated on certain sectors. And therefore, we have a less clarity in predicting how much public money will be poured. Or IPO price. It's difficult to predict the IPO price. So in that sense, I think spec could be advantageous if you can fix the IPO price. And in order to facilitate spec, in the past, we only had the spec M&A, where spec survive and the companies that are subject to M&A will disappear. But then the last year, we changed the law to vice versa.
매출처, 매입처, 관공서 등에 모두 새롭게 등록, 변경하는 절차가 많이
Because previously the administrative process was pretty complicated. That you have to get license and register the companies all over again anew. So in order to ensure the business continuity, we changed the regulation. So rather than companies, we decided to let spec disappear.
Thank you, and please give another round of applause to Mr. Lee Jae. Thank you to all 4 speakers and all the audience here today. We hope that this session was fruitful for all the bio startups and ventures seeking to go public in the near future. Of course, IPO can't be the only exit route for companies and investors. I think we all know that it is certainly a major strategy. Thank you again for joining us at the Domestic and Overseas Listing Strategy session at BIX. We will now proceed with the next session immediately after changing the stage setting. Please stay with us for our next business session by Clarivate, which will be presenting on the utility of bioinformatics, trends, and forecast of global biopharma markets. Thank you, everyone.